I mean, please join. If you're remote, join. Shireen, all right. So, good morning, and let's take a look at the background or the lead up to the events that are covered in George Orwell's 1945 novel Animal Farm. Okay, now as you know, Animal Farm is a thinly veiled allegorical representation of the October 1917 revolution, as well as all the events that unfolded in Russia after that. Okay, and it is also a fable in the sense that it uses, let's say, animals in order to convey the aftermath or the effects of human actions. Okay, so essentially, a fable is an allegorical representation of something that happens in the world, understand, and that is presented through the voice as well as through the actions of animals. Okay, sometimes these animals are used as stock characters, like for example, a cunning man might be represented by a fox. Okay, a noble person may be represented as a lion or a tiger and so on, understand. So when we look at the way that the October 1917 revolution and all the other events that followed it are presented, we understand that George Orwell is not just trying to mark this event, okay, or create a certain fictional history. He is also trying to tell us about the nature and the behavior of human beings. Okay, because these animals are also in a way representative of the various people that he's trying to put across. Understand? Categories of people: the leaders, the workers. Okay, then the people who provide the external support, the instigators, those that incite all of this. Okay, and he says that he has written books like Homage to Catalonia. He has written Animal Farm and so on, in order to make people understand the reality. Okay, because George Orwell, when he returned to England, and he took part in the various demonstrations, in the various revolutions, like I mentioned the other day, he was part of the Spanish Civil War. Okay, when he did all of these things, he had come face to face with the basic and essential realities, not just of war, but also of greed, of political greed, as well as the hunger for power. Okay, so all of this had left a rather bitter aftertaste in his mouth. And he, on one hand, while he was a passionate advocate of leftist ideology, he had also come to realize, okay, that there is one thing called theory, okay, and the other called practical or practice is something else altogether. That which looks good on paper, the ideology which looks good on paper, when it is put into practice, it becomes something radically different. And the reason for that is human nature. Okay, so we could say that Animal Farm is in effect an allegory, not just of the events of the October 1917 revolution or whatever came after. It is also an allegory of human nature. Understand? Where there are emotions, or not emotions, but characteristics such as greed, okay, gullibility, innocence, dedication, all of these things are placed as allegories. Okay, so these characters in the novel that you will come across are not just stand-ins or representatives of people like Stalin and people like Leon Trotsky and the Communist Party and the KGB and so on. They are also stand-ins for greed, dedication, okay, adherence to ideology, blind faith. Okay, and the cumulative effect that you see at the end of the novel, it is the result of all of these factors that come into play in the real world. Understand? So what you have to understand is that sometimes, okay, that is if the writer has used intelligence. Please don't write that in your answers. Yeah, if the writer has used perception at different levels, then one work can be used to reveal the multiple layers, okay, of meaning, of signification, okay, that actually exist. Okay, so even works of far-flung fantasy, sometimes when you look just beneath the surface, you will realize that they carry huge significations. Okay, this work, Animal Farm, is one such. Okay, and later on, George Orwell went on to write works such as 1984. It's written in 1949. Should be easy to remember that way. Okay, and in that, he talks about a government of surveillance, a government that bases itself on surveillance. Okay, and if you think about it, both these works, both Animal Farm as well as 1984, are extremely relevant, have been extremely relevant through the ages. Understand? Both these novels, in terms of the way that governments have been placing citizens increasingly under surveillance, the way that governments have been influencing people to think, behave, and believe in a certain way. Understand? All of these are characteristics of the current age. And to think that this was written in 1949 and in 1945, respectively, when people did not have much of an inkling about these things, not just shows how far-sighted George Orwell was. It also tells us how close he must have observed the nature of authority. Okay, so it also points out how closely he has observed the nature of authority, probably firsthand. Okay, and all of this could have possibly come across to him because he was such an active part of the various political movements, ideological, fomentations, FOMENTATIONS, okay, fomentations that had been happening in and around Europe at that point of time, the people that he came into contact with. Okay, another thing that I would like to point out to you people basically is that what we have to understand from these things is that one has to be involved, understand, study, and then take a stand. Okay, it is very, very important to take a stand in matters. But before you take a stand, you have to be amply informed, reliably informed as well. Okay, so these two works are quite complex in the ways that they talk about the intervention of technology, the intervention of authority, the role that ideology can play in shaping an individual. Okay, so at the end of the day, you'll realize that that is what Animal Farm actually talks about. Okay, that while it uses allegory to discuss the events of the October 1917 revolution and the aftermath, it uses the October 1917 revolution and its aftermath as an allegory to talk about the effect of authority, the effect of ideology on ordinary human beings at various levels. So it's an allegory within an allegory. Okay. All right. Now that we have kind of contextualized the novel in that sense of the term, we should understand why Russia. Okay, why is it that Russia was chosen by Orwell to discuss this? See, the thing was that. Well, would you like to tell me? Do you have a guess? Why would you guess?
Because he had a leftist ideology. Maybe he found it.
Then yeah, so he had that, yes, but why? I mean, still, why talk about Russia? Spread off. Rizwana says spread off. Spread of communism. Yes, good, good. Okay, uh, that's right. See, by the time it was in 1917, what had happened was that the communist ideology, thanks to the work done by Marx and Engels, had kind of gripped the imagination of a vast swath of the population in Europe. Okay, who were trying to look at the ill effects of capitalism. Okay, who were suffering from the ill effects of capitalism. And here comes along a movement that was trying to put the power in the hands of the people. Okay, where production was supposed to be common for everybody. Consumption was supposed to be common and need based. You need this much, you will get this much. It was talking about a society where there would be this mentality of sharing. Okay, where everything would be based on this idea of community. Okay, the people would be living in communes, people would be producing food for the community. This would be acquired by the government and supplied to the people based on their needs. Okay, it talked about a more equitable society. Okay, and we all know what the Industrial Revolution did to all of Europe. Okay, not only did it cause Europe to push outwards and acquire more territories outside so as to find a market for their products, it also irrevocably changed their society. Understand? It created deep class divides. Okay, and it kind of led to this great instability of income. It caused a great deal of migration from the rural areas to the urban areas, which had become extremely crowded. Okay, the resources of the cities were stretched to the maximum. Okay, urban poverty became a reality. Understand? Political power was concentrated in the hands of a few. There was this feeling of suffocation in the people. Okay, and then here come Marx and Engels, who talk about a freer society, a society that is freed from capitalism, where the power is in the hands of the people, where people in the sense ordinary people are given the right to choose. They are given the power to choose. They are recognized as people who are capable of making a choice. Now, to whom will this ideology not appeal? Understand? So people began to actively consider communism as an alternative to this capitalist driven power limiting kind of a system. Understand? And of course there were those that tried to discredit communism based on these very ideas. Okay, in the 1960s in America, communism became a very, very dirty word. Okay, it became a criminal word. All right, and there used to be these huge files maintained on people. There was this person called McCarthy, James McCarthy. He would he was in charge of collecting this sort of information. And suppose you do not like your neighbor, you could go and report to the nearest not just police station, I think they also had offices for these kind of things, and you would say my neighbor is actually a communist, and they would open a file on the person, put the person under surveillance. Understand? And observe, read them, pull out all their economic records, see whom they are meeting, what they are doing, where they are going. All of these things would be done. Understand? Anyway, that is in the 1960s. We don't have to go there. We'll stay here. Okay, so and the Communist Manifesto became a very important social document, because apart from talking about rights for workers, it also discussed complex gender issues that were deeply dividing Europe at that point of time. Okay, recognizing women as a very viable workforce, trying to recognize the work that women do in the house as unpaid labor. See, all of these things that have made a comeback today were also very much there in the works of Marx and Engels. Okay, then talking about cultural production. How is culture produced? Okay, how do we manufacture culture? So culture became as important as economic needs. Understand? So you had dialectic materialism, you had cultural materialism, you had all of these things being discussed. So, it was not just, oh, workers of the world unite. No, it was not just about being a workers' movement. Communism was also an intellectual and cultural movement. Understand? And there was also the remarkable spread of education that had happened because, education was also no longer restricted to a few. Okay, the avenues of education had opened up. So all of this, created a great deal of awareness. Understand? So when Orwell wrote about this, just before that, there was a great deal of optimism that there would be an alternative, a viable alternative would be there. But when he writes about the way that communism has been destroyed by, again, placing power in the hands of a few, he talks about or warns about the dictatorial tendencies that can come about. Okay, he also points to the inherent weakness in every ideology. Okay, so it's also an essential warning that says, do not do things in this way. Okay, right. So why he chose Russia was because Russia was a country that had wholeheartedly embraced communism. Okay, where if in during the French Revolution, the workers as well as the common people in France had seized power in France and had charged up the imagination of Europe at that point of time, in the current century, it was Russia. Understand? See, Russia had been under the rule of the Romanovs for hundreds of years. Okay, and the last Tsar of Russia was Tsar
Alexander
Nicholas.
II. Right, okay.
Sorry?
I was thinking about Tsar Alexander II.
Sorry, yeah, Tsar Alexander. That's right. Okay, yeah. So his name was Nikolai, so that's why. Anyway, so Tsar Nicholas II, and he started ruling from 1894, and he had inherited a huge empire. Okay, the Russian Empire was literally so huge, it was finding it difficult to stand on its own two legs. And Tsar Nicholas was under the shadow of his father. Okay, now Nicholas was this slight, thin kind of a guy, and his father was, one of those strong men. Apparently, he could just bash his way through doors. Okay, he was a big built, burly kind of a man, and this was this stripling of a guy, and the father would constantly make fun of Nicholas by calling him girly. Okay, that was his nickname for the son, girly. So when he inherited the empire in 1894, Nicholas had a very tough legacy, because he would be constantly compared to his strong father. Okay, and also because by the time he inherited the throne, the autocracy did not sit well with the people. Okay, people had begun to resist autocracy, and Russia was fast, not being the power that it used to be. Okay, there were disastrous wars being fought, and people were very resistant to authority. So Russia entered into a rather foolish war with Japan. Okay, and this kind of affected the people because their armies were out there fighting. There was a shortage of food. The place was on the verge of a famine, and the government was imposing more taxes and trying to extract revenue from the people. In 1905, there was this demonstration that took place in the capital, St. Petersburg, and some of the peasants were fired upon by the police, and this led to months of widespread protests. And the sad thing was that Russia was steadily losing the battle with Japan. Okay, now when that happened, then people were like, we are fighting an unprofitable war. The Tsar is not capable. Why are we even here? So then the Tsar had to take one step back, and he declared what was called the October Manifesto. See, the month October becomes very significant here. The October Manifesto. This was in 1905. Okay. Now, he gave some concessions. What he did was that, he said, okay, civil rights will be protected. Okay. We will create a constitution for Russia, and we will also have a parliament, a form of parliamentary government, and the parliament shall be called Duma. Okay, till today, the parliament is called Duma. And, this appeased most of the revolutionaries, the rebels. But the thing was that, this was just cosmetic. Okay, because what had happened was that, the Tsar could just disperse the Duma whenever he felt like it. So if the Duma brought about some idea and the Tsar did not like it, he would just disperse it. നമ്മൾ പറയത്തില്ലേ, പിരിച്ചുവിടും, assembly പിരിച്ചുവിട്ടു. That is exactly what he would do. Okay, so the thing was that nothing ever really got done actually. Understand? Yes, and not only that, people were so inspired by the writings of Karl Marx that, because Karl Marx had written about a revolt by peasants, which, would lead to the labor classes becoming the ruling classes. Okay, and following the Communist Manifesto, a lot of people, such as Lenin, began to agitate for greater reforms, for greater power against the Tsar. Okay, and the thing was that there was also a class of people called the Intelligentsia. Intelligentsia. Okay, now these were the educated classes of Russia, and they felt that a lot more could have been done in terms of governance, which was not being fulfilled. Okay, so by the time the First World War came around in 1914, what had happened was that there were a lot of social and economic issues that had not been dealt with. Understand? Farmers were being oppressed severely. Okay, their taxes were increased, their produces were being confiscated to support miscellaneous wars. Okay, and the production was at an all-time low. There were hardly any industries, and on top of everything else, Russia entered into the war with Germany. Okay, and what happened was that people began to come to the capital, Saint Petersburg, in order to look for money, work, food, and so on. And when they came into St. Petersburg, what they saw were, grand palaces, beautiful streets, okay, horses on the streets and so on. And, that kind of made them extremely angry. Understand? So, what happened was that, all of this kind of led to widespread protests. In fact, there was this protest by the women. See, interestingly, that is the thing. Both in the French Revolution as well as in the Russian Revolution, it was this protest by the women that actually served as a catalyst for triggering both revolutions. Understand? Yes. And by the early 1917s, okay. St. Petersburg was a place that was almost volatile because there was the Tsar's army, there were the revolutionaries who were standing opposed to each other. Okay, and then finally on February 27th, see, we should also understand one thing: the Russian calendar has a slightly different timeline than the other Gregorian calendar. Now everything has been unified, of course, but that was also there. So when we say October, they also do October, but yeah, Julian calendar. Yes. So where they say 17, it might be first. It could be like that. That kind of a difference is there. Okay, so anyway, so the thing is that a lot of people stormed the Tauride Palace, okay, which was the seat of the Duma, and they wanted to establish a workers' council, okay, which actually happened. Okay, so the current government was set aside, and a workers' council was established, and all they wanted to do was establish a government of the workers along the lines of the one that was talked about by Karl Marx. Okay, and a provisional government was formed. So imagine that a set of people marching into the seat of the parliament, deposing the existing government, which was anyway a puppet government, and establishing a council of workers and having a provisional government. Okay, and at that point of time, Tsar Nicholas abdicated. He gave up his throne, effectively bringing the Romanov dynasty's rule in Russia to an end. In another sense of the term also, it ended because, he and his family were rounded up, taken to a basement, kept there for some days, and finally they were all shot dead. Okay, so that way also the dynasty sadly came to an end. Okay, anyway, that is sad. Okay, now the provisional government was led by Prime Minister Georgy Lvov, and there was also Kerensky. Okay, he was the justice minister. Well, he was also the war minister. Which Kerensky was a very very strong figure. Understand? And the kind of negotiations that were carried out, the kind of propaganda that was put forward, declared, even Lenin called it, Russia the freest country in the world. Okay, so this was the way that events were unfolding at a very fast pace in Russia. Okay, and at that point of time, Lenin was not even in Russia; he was in exile in Switzerland. Okay, then another time he would be in exile in Finland. Okay, based on the way that things were being carried out in Russia, he would arrive in Russia. Okay, and then he would be sent back again. It was a given, it was a rather uneven relationship that he had with the government at that point of time. Okay, anyway, the final time that he returned from Finland, he decided that power must be seized once and for all. Okay, now Russia had the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks among the revolutionaries. Okay, and the Bolsheviks were greater adherents of the Marxist ideology. Okay, so Lenin seized power, and through the October 1917 revolution, he came into prominence. Okay, and what was unleashed after that was literally a reign of very tight control. Okay, and but at the same time there was equal importance that was given to culture as well. Okay, so while the forms of government were tightening their hold on the people, on the other hand, culture was viewed as a very very important instrument of negotiation. Understand? So there were these grand operas, there were music concerts, there was a great deal of beautiful writing that was being done. Understand? And Lenin realized that it is important to put more power in the hands of the people. So what he began to do is that peasants were allowed to have control of their land. So by the time Lenin's death neared, about 90% of the cultivable land was in the hands of the peasants. Okay, as opposed to the earlier time when hardly any power was there in their hands. Production had increased, industrialization had increased, all of these things had happened. Okay, but at the same time, Russia was not a country that was at ease with itself. Okay, because one had to find an effective successor to Lenin. Okay, and Stalin was not the first choice. Okay, Stalin was actually never the real first choice as the answer for Lenin. Okay, it was actually a man called Leon Trotsky. Okay, so see, this is first generation of Russian revolutionaries and Russian government, and now you have the second generation. Okay, so by the time Lenin was at the end of his life, he did experience a great deal of disillusionment with what was happening around him, but by then it had been too late. Okay, and as I told you, in 1914 the First World War came around, and then you had the Second World War as well, and at that point of time, people such as Leon Trotsky began to play a very important role. Okay, and what happened was that Stalin used his men and his might in order to gain control over certain very important branches of government. Okay, the first being the Duma, the second being the army. Okay, with these two agents under his control, he was able to manipulate the cultural, the economic, and the political scenario of Russia. Okay, see, those who have read the novel would know that there is a certain army that is put into place. Any idea? Anybody remembers? Yes, anybody remembers that? A secret army? No?
Isn't three puppies? Um,
Yes, that's right. That's right. Good. Okay, with the puppies. Understand? Yes, which then become full-fledged dogs. Okay, yes. So now we come to the way that Stalin began to take his control over Russia, and the way that he found an effective opponent in Leon Trotsky, and what he did about it. See, Trotsky was an antithesis of Stalin. Okay, in the sense that while Stalin believed in brute force, Trotsky was the man who wanted to open up trade, open up commerce, open up industry, and try to make Russia more accessible to the world outside. So while Stalin dropped the Iron Curtain, Trotsky was trying to part it. See, the Iron Curtain was a term that was used in terms of Russia because nobody would be allowed to see what was going on inside. Understand? So what Trotsky did was that he became the international face of Russia. Okay, he negotiated with Germany for a very Germany had Russia in its clutches, and during the course of the war with Germany, Russia had suffered a great deal of setback, and it was Trotsky who was sent in order to negotiate a deal. Okay, he did that. He kind of unified workers' councils. He tried to advocate a greater system of economic freedom for the people, and he was also a great cultural exponent. He has even written books. So he was the true intelligentsia. He was a leader with a great deal of foresight and connect with the people. Okay, but such was Stalin's paranoia that he decided that this man has to be sent into exile. So he sent Trotsky into exile, someplace in Central Asia. Okay, and from there he was banished from Russia forever. And that led Trotsky to move from a couple of countries to finally come and settle in Mexico. He was staying in Mexico City. He had come into contact with the poet Frida Kahlo and her husband, and artist Frida Kahlo and her husband, Diego Rivera. And he was leading a very interesting life over there, in that, his political views were being heard, people were talking about him, and he was still a very, very potent force. And there were a number of assassination attempts made on his life, and finally one succeeded. A Mexican managed to shoot him. Understand? And when the Mexican was questioned, he said, "I did it on my own. Okay, nobody forced me to do it. There is no involvement of the Communist Party in this whole thing." Okay, so effectively nobody could pin anything on Stalin, but everybody knew that it was Stalin, after all, who could have caused this to happen. Understand? So, what happened was that in Russia, or generally in the world, there were two forms of communism that began to be talked about. One was Stalinism, which was the use of brute force, which was the use of paranoia, which was the use of discrediting rivals. Understand? We will see quite a lot of discrediting in the Animal Farm. Okay, discrediting essentially means calling somebody a traitor, calling somebody an anti-national, and spreading false propaganda about them. Okay, that is called discrediting. And the other was Trotskyism, which combined a system of free governance, which combined that free governance with let's say awareness of culture, which was a more elite kind of an idea. But such is the impact of elite, in the sense high thinking idea. But such was the impact of propaganda that in Russia, Stalinism came to stand for the government by ordinary people. Okay, the peasants, the people who come from the soil, the earth, kind of a thing. And Trotskyism came to stand for elitism. Okay, upper class communism. Can you believe that there's something called upper class communism? Understand? So that was how. So that became, the communism of the snooty people, the people who did not really have any kind of knowledge of how the lower levels of society live and work. Okay, so it is this interesting point that Orwell also points out in his novel when you see the trajectory with which the novel kind of develops. Okay, you have, in the beginning, a great deal of belief, zeal, okay, in the ideas and tenets. There is a manifesto that is made, okay. It's almost like the biblical 10 commandments that is there, and it is followed to the text. There is an anthem, there is all of that. And then what happens is the actual revolution comes about. Okay, there is deposition, the dethroning, the sending out, the exile, and then the occupation, and then a system of governance, a system of division of labor, a belief in a common ideology, the identification of a rival, feeling threatened by the rival, and a means of discrediting the rival and trying to drive him out of power and establishing an absolutist form of governance through terror. Understand? So much so that ultimately it is all the same. Those that have gone, those that have stayed behind, everybody becomes the same. Understand? So that sense of the term Animal Farm is a dystopian novel. Okay, dystopian. It's a dystopian novel in that it presents a bleak scenario. Okay, where it had started out as hopeful, but ultimately it all collapses within itself. Understand? And anyway, that is what happened with Russia also till the 1990s, when you had the ideas of perestroika and glasnost, okay, openness and better governance and so on, which came into force and helped Russia, take away the Iron Curtain and supposedly open it up, because people believe that democracy is the way forward. And of course, then things became radically different with the coming of various governments, the breakup of the USSR, and the way that the now Russia has started controlling all of its satellite countries, those that were part of the Eastern Bloc or the then USSR. There are all of these sociological as well as anthropological questions that have yet not been addressed, and that possibly might never be addressed unless a different kind of leadership comes in. But that is for later. Understand? So this is in effect the build-up, the reasons, the cause, okay, of why George Orwell wrote The Animal Farm, as well as why he decided to pick Russia and create such a transparent, allegorical, satirical, dystopian novel. Okay? Is there anything that you would like to ask me at this point of time? Seek clarifications?
Ma'am, can you say about Frida Kahlo, the
Yes.
point where you said about Frida Kahlo?
Yeah. Yes. See, what do you want to know? You want to know about Frida Kahlo?
Yes, ma'am. More about maybe what the context
Yeah, yeah.
which you talked about
Why
her.
I meant, yeah, Frida Kahlo is that she was one of the greatest artists of the last century. Hmm? And she was quite an interesting artist. Have you seen any of her paintings?
Yes, ma'am. She drew
Yes.
herself
So
portraits and all of that. I've seen.
yes, she was a woman who was not afraid of expressing her sensuality. okay, or her sexuality. And she was, I would say, one of the foremost faces of progressive artists at that point of time. And she had a very interesting relationship with her husband, Diego Rivera. Okay, and together, they formed a cultural axis down in South America. In fact, the way that we perceive South America these days, etc., and the way that South America has begun to perceive itself, all of these things have a great deal of connection with the way that Frida Kahlo presented her art or her views on art, the irreverence, the ability to be confessional, okay, the unapologetic eye that she trained around everything. Okay, so and also the fact that this was a woman who was able to do that, and the fact that she combined her personal charm and her art, and to say that that is not wrong. See, these things are very politically correct, incorrect in today's times. But when it was, when Frida Kahlo did it, when she practiced a technique, people actually admired her for that. And people such as Amrita Shergill and so on also drew a great deal of inspiration.
Okay,
Anything
ma'am.
else that you would like to know about her in specific, or is
No,
that?
ma'am. No, ma'am. That's enough. That's fine. That's fine.
And see, why I mentioned her at this point of time was that there is this cultural gravitation that people do. Okay, like Leon Trotsky need not have met these people, but this was the place to meet. That was the house to go to. Those were the people to meet. See, in the times of about the last century, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, etc., people actually met and connected with each other, and there was this greater flow of information, knowledge, points of view, etc., that actually happened in the Parisian wayside cafes, happened in the addas in Bengal, happened in coffee shops in India, in Kerala, happened in coffee shops in England, happened in various villas and homes of the people in places in South America, happened by wayside cafes in America. All of these conversations were surging. Artists were trying to find their voice. Artists were trying to create art that was never heard of or seen or read before, and they were actually using human experiences. See, another thing is that the what is the human became very important in all of these places. Okay, in the literature of the time, see, look at this. Look at Animal Farm. Look at 1984. It is not just the ideology that is being foregrounded. It is the individual in that particular age that is being foregrounded. You have works like a lot of works of that time that have come about that look at the human being. Look at the works by people like Ernest Hemingway. Okay, it's the human that is presented there. Understand? So these were times, I suppose, when also, like I had mentioned in the earlier class, psychology. Okay, study of who you are, what your mind is, what it works like. All of these things had become very important. Okay, and these conversations that were taking place between artists were not just getting over the minute that they went their ways. No, these things had a very great impact on politics of that time. Okay, because many of them, it was kind of a connect. These revolutionaries were artists or they were friends of artists. Everybody would sit together, talk about it, go their ways, that kind of a thing. So it was a very interesting time to be there. That's why.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Now, is it too much of information?
No, ma'am.
Anybody else? Would you like to know something?
Yes, when we talked about the secret police with the puppies, I mean the dogs area, were we talking
Yeah.
about the chica? We were talking about the chica, right?
I'm sorry, talking about
The chica, the secret police in Russia.
yes, yes, yes. Which were the forerunners of the KGB?
Oh, right. And also, ma'am, the other day I read something. that when Putin took over, he actually gained control of. I mean, before Putin took over, there was this sect of people, really rich capitalists, who had all the power. Like they had a specific name or something. I don't remember.
Oligarchs. They were called the oligarchs.
Yes, the oligarchs. Uh, and now Putin has the power of all of that people, and then he says that he's leading a democracy. What kind of is Russia really a democracy right now, man?
I'm going to stop recording.